Good afternoon, South Mississippi. Let's take a look at the tropics. We're going to be focusing on the new area that the National Hurricane Center has highlighted. And we'll be taking a look at exactly what that means and taking a closer look, especially further in the future, as to what exactly this could mean for some of the areas in the possible path of what this system could be. Now, let's take a look at the infrared satellite across the tropics right now, and you can tell there's a little bit of disturbed area in the Gulf of Mexico. We've been seeing showers and thunderstorms throughout the day today, and this is going to be related to that system. Now, this is not expected to become a tropical system, but this could definitely bring a lot of rainfall, especially to Texas, Louisiana, and here in Mississippi. We could be seeing, especially Texas and Louisiana, up to 3 to 5 inches of rainfall over just the next couple of days over towards us, closer to about the 3-inch range, depending on how many of these storms end up forming throughout the afternoon hours. So now let's take a look a little bit closer out in the tropical Atlantic. You can see there in the corner of the screen we do have a couple different tropical waves that we are monitoring, and the National Hurricane Center has highlighted this one right here in the middle. This has a medium chance of development over the next 5 to 7 days. And this area is expected to move into the Caribbean over about the next 5 days, and conditions are favorable for this to continue developing once it moves across the Lesser Antilles, and it does begin to trek across the Caribbean. This is where we're going to begin to keep our close eye on this. Let's take a look at some of our different models and what they're outputting. And you can see here, this is our Saharan dust tracker. This is mainly monitoring for Saharan dust and dry air across the tropics. And you can see here, as this system does approach the Caribbean, it does deal with a little bit of some drier air, so development may be very slow, especially over these next couple of days. Once it moves into the Caribbean, it does begin to lag behind that plume of Saharan dust, so it could begin to develop a little bit further at this point as it moves closer to the Greater Antilles, and then thus moving into the area near Jamaica and Cuba. Now you can see here it is no longer dealing with any dry air at all. So of course the potential for much further development as we go into this time period. Now you can see here in the top corner, this is all the way into next weekend. This is still pretty far out, and we don't know an exact track or an exact strength at this time. This is still, once again, more than 5 to 7 days out. So we're beginning to get into that point where at this point it's a lot of speculation. We don't know exactly the strength, the track, or exactly when or where a center could form. So this would be the time to continue to monitor for updates, come back, keep checking the forecast, as a lot can change between now and next weekend. Now let's take a look at a couple of our global models. Now these different models are trying to output exactly what could potentially happen if conditions remain the way that they are expected to be based on that other model we just took a look at. And you can see here, this is the GFS. This is very commonly used here in the United States, and you can see once this system moves into the Caribbean, that red area in the central Caribbean, it does begin to develop a lot faster, and we can see that because of that drier air moving ahead of the system like we did see on the Saharan dust tracker. And the GFS does pull this up north of Jamaica but keeps it south of Cuba as we head into next weekend. So based on the GFS here, it would be expected to move very close to Cuba, ending up just south of the island by about next weekend. And of course, once again, we are leaving that 5 to 7 day range. So this would be the time period where we do begin to see a lot of variation in the models. Now, let's move over to the Euro model. This is another model that does output very similar to the GFS. And you can see here it actually begins to develop it a little bit sooner. It does show that some of the drier air will allow for development a little bit sooner than what the GFS did show. That could indicate a much quicker development of the system itself as it moves through the Caribbean. Here you can see that it does move in a very similar track to what the GFS was showing. This is much closer to the island of Jamaica, but still passing Jamaica to the north, staying well to the south of Cuba. This model, very similar to what we saw on the GFS, does place it very close to Cuba on the south side of the island by next weekend. So a lot of consistency in the models at this time, as we're seeing this moving very close to or near Cuba by about next weekend. Now, of course, beyond that, the steering pattern becomes much less clear to us. And you can see that things do begin to develop very slowly after that, and not a lot of models even have very much output at that time. So beyond 5 to 7 days, we do have a lot of speculation in exactly where or when the actual development does happen, and we also begin to monitor for other things. Surface temperature of the water could definitely have a lot of variation here. What the Euro just showed, with it passing much closer to some of the islands, we could be seeing it develop a lot slower. And of course, that dry air we saw in the earlier model could change over the next several days. So that's just a couple things we need to keep an eye on, but take a look at this. Here's what we know as of right now. We have a tropical wave with a medium chance of development out in the tropical Atlantic. It does move into the Caribbean next week, slowly develops. There is conditions in the Caribbean favorable for this to develop throughout the course of next week, and it should, based on both the GFS and the Euro, should end up very close to Cuba by next weekend. Beyond that, we're really not sure exactly what track it's going to take or what strength it could potentially be. So anything beyond that would be speculation. But of course, just something to keep an eye on. You want to come back and continue to check for changes in the forecast, especially as we go over the next couple of days, as we do begin to learn a lot more about this system. Once it actually develops, once it gets a center, then at that point we can definitely begin to see more different models begin to output for it, as well as the potential to see exactly where it's going to start moving towards, how many islands it interacts with. All of these different things could potentially change the output of these forecast models that we just took a deeper look at. We'll continue to keep you guys updated here, both on the web, on social media, as well as here on YouTube. We're going to continue to watch the system very closely as it does move across the Caribbean, but once again, at this time, there is no imminent threats to South Mississippi, and there are no imminent threats anywhere in the United States at this time. But we will continue to update you guys as we learn more and take a look at what we've seen in this season so far. Now, the next name on the list would be Francine, but of course we have already seen Alberto as a tropical storm. Hurricane Beryl earlier in the season was a Category 5, one of the earliest Category 5s in history. Chris, a tropical storm that also impacted Mexico. Of course, Debbie and Ernesto both became hurricanes as well. So we've already had a fairly active start to the season, and we did have a fairly quiet period here over the past couple of weeks, but as we near the peak of hurricane season, which is typically in the beginning of September, we definitely want to keep an eye out for any of these tropical waves that continue to move across the Caribbean. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we're going to continue to update that forecast. Of course, keep an eye on the weather blog on our website. That will also give you the latest information on this tropical wave as it continues to move towards the Caribbean.